A regular tree trimming operation in the Korean Demilitarized Zone, DMZ, in August 1976 degenerated into a violent altercation. In what became known as the Axe Murder Incident, two U.S. officers, Captain Arthur Boniface and First Lieutenant Mark Barrett, were brutally murdered by North Korean forces. A strong U.S.-South Korean response to this startling act of aggression, which brought tensions to the verge of war, made it abundantly evident that provocation would not go unpunished. Unrest in Korea. The murder in the DMZ Captain Arthur Boniface and First Lieutenant Mark Barrett started the day off on what appeared to be the most mundane mission of their careers. They would command a work detail of Korean and American soldiers on a duty that, at first glance, would appear to be so ordinary that it wouldn't even be worth writing about. The mission focused on gardening, a pastime so uninteresting that it is more commonly associated with retirees than with military personnel. Nobody could have predicted that an unanticipated foe would have hacked Barrett and Boniface to death by the end of the day. Who was in charge of this slaughter? Was it someone else or one of their men? August 1976 is the date. Despite more regular clashes between North and South Korea on the Demilitarized Zone, DMZ, the armistice governing the Korean War was still in effect at this time. The event took place in the Neutral Joint Security Area, JSA, a crossing point where both sides are more closely positioned to one another than at any other location along their shared border. But there was just one issue: a huge poplar tree that obscured the view between an observation post and a UN checkpoint. In order to keep a clear line of sight, it was evident that cutting down the tree was the wisest course of action. It wouldn't be that easy, of course, as this is the world's most highly guarded border. A small team was dispatched to chop down the tree at the start of the month, but a North Korean guard ordered them to leave it alone. Another squad was dispatched on August 18th, 2 weeks later, after it was decided to trim the tree rather than remove it. Captain Boniface, his subordinate First Lieutenant Barrett, and Korean Captain Kim, who commanded 11 enlisted soldiers, escorted the 5 South Korean Special Corps members. Since firearms were prohibited in the Joint Security Area, the guys refused to carry them. A skirmish that turned into a full-scale conflict was the last thing anyone wanted. The escort arrived in a truck with mattocks packed in the back, and the 5 lumberjacks were armed with axes. With the escort watching and the trimmers chopping away at the poplar tree's limbs, everything started nicely enough. When work started, things got a little trickier. Not just any poplar tree, though. It was purportedly planted by none other than Kim Il-sung. For those who might not be familiar with Kim, he served as North Korea's president and, more significantly, as the focal point of a cult of personality that still exists today. Being disrespected by a group of foreigners was intolerable, especially since the tree's installation was directly associated with such an auspicious person. They were ordered to cease work immediately when 15 North Korean soldiers poured out of their garrison. The South Korean employees, led by Captain Boniface, responded by continuing to work despite the directive. As the North Koreans continued to cut away at the poplar tree, they sent a runner. Nothing happened for around 15 minutes until a truck carrying 20 more North Korean soldiers arrived. Lieutenant Pak Chol, known as the Bulldog because of his brazen and combative demeanor, was in charge of them. He was the ideal leader in a delicate circumstance like this. He gave the order for his forces to charge against the Americans and South Koreans without any delay. He said, "Kill them," and exhorted his men to assault. The North Koreans picked up the axes that the tree trimmers abandoned as they fled, outnumbered and caught off guard. The Americans and South Koreans were caught off guard when the North Koreans rushed over them during the following 30 seconds. They were so overpowered that they could not effectively defend themselves or make it to their mattocks in time. After being thrown to the ground, Captain Boniface was surrounded by at least 5 of the North Korean assailants and brutally beaten to death with crowbars and clubs. First Lieutenant Barrett suffered severe injuries after being struck by an axe. On the way to the hospital, he passed away shortly after. Since they were outnumbered and unprepared for this degree of aggression, the battle could hardly be regarded as fair, and all but one of the South Koreans and Americans who took part in this routine operation were injured. The North Koreans denied any responsibility for the outburst. 14 hoodlums were dispatched to cut down the tree without the DPRK's prior approval, according to North Korean sources. 4 guards asked the Americans and South Koreans to halt. The outnumbered North Koreans were compelled to protect themselves from this flagrant act of hostility after the guards were viciously attacked and defended themselves with their firearms. Kim Il-sung denounced the South Koreans and the Americans. When security camera footage revealed the larger number of North Koreans, this narrative collapsed. Whatever the rationale, the South Korean and American governments found themselves in a difficult situation. This egregious breach of the DMZ and the ceasefire would require some kind of response. However, they didn't want to start a public dispute that would get out of hand. However, whether or not the North Koreans agreed, it was ultimately decided to take down the poplar tree. 3 days after Boniface and Barrett were killed, on August 21st, North Korean troops awaited the arrival of a second detail to chop down the tree. They came into something somewhat larger than a small work crew equipped solely with farm implements. 16 members of the 2nd Engineer Battalion, equipped with chainsaws, rode in a column of South Korean and American armored vehicles to the joint security area in what was known as Operation Paul Bunyan. They were protected by 64 soldiers of the South Korean Special Forces, including future South Korean President Moon Jae-in and a 30-man security platoon. Some stories claim that some of the South Koreans carried Claymore anti-personnel mines strapped to their chests, detonators in hand, challenging the North Koreans to shoot them. They were also armed with M16 rifles, M79 grenade launchers, and pistols. In addition, 20 utility helicopters and 7 Cobra attack helicopters provided close air support. Those on the ground could readily see more aviation assets on patrol high above, such as American F-4 Phantoms, F-111 Aardvarks, and a flight of B-52 Stratofortresses, as well as South Korean F-5 and F-86 jets. As if that weren't enough, all Korean soldiers were placed on DEFCON 3, the maximum level of alert in peacetime, and the USS Midway was on standby, prepared to launch its aircraft if necessary offshore. As the work crew completed the task that had begun on the 18th, the North Koreans prepared machine gun positions but did nothing because they were intimidated by the massive display of force. Although a sizable portion of the trunk was left standing as a warning, the tree, which was initially simply intended to be trimmed, was taken down. Before the workers packed up and departed, the operation took roughly 45 minutes. Although there were no additional incidents or casualties, the South Koreans allegedly destroyed 2 guard posts and dismantled 2 barriers that the North Koreans had erected along the route. Kim Il-sung, the leader of North Korea, apologized for the axe murder incident shortly after Operation Paul Bunyan ended, regretting the regrettable actions that had led to heightened tensions. To prevent any more miscommunications that would potentially lead to a conflict breaking out, it was decided in subsequent talks that each side would keep its portions of the joint security area, which prohibited any interaction between the soldiers on the opposing sides. The JSA's advance camp was renamed after Captain Boniface in remembrance of the 2 officers who were killed, and the Northern Mission Platoon's accommodation was renamed after First Lieutenant Barrett. We sincerely appreciate your support of the Echoes of the Past YouTube channel. Please subscribe to Echoes of the Past if you like our work so that we can continue to provide you with interesting and educational history video. For further historical videos, check out our channel. We truly value your support.